right, welcome back to the Washington State Real Estate Investing Podcast. So excited to have Clint Coons here with me today, all the way from Tacoma, talking about business strategy, setting up businesses in real estate, something that I am also passionate about. Clint, thank you for being here, all the way from Tacoma virtually. Didn't even have to make the drive up I-5 to Seattle today to do this interview, which is great. I love that technology allows us this. Why don't you just give us a little bit about your background and introduce yourself to the listeners today?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jeff. Well, I am an attorney, as you mentioned. I'm also a real estate investor. And I grew up in Washington State. I grew up over in the Paulsbo area. And I often tell people that I think the only reason my father wanted a couple of sons is that he realized the advantage of having indentured servants for 27 years. And, as long as he was paying, sending me to college, and he would always have us, my brother and I always had things to do on his property. So I grew up with that in my background, buying properties for $1, picking them up, moving them to a lot with a cinder block foundation, dropping them, hooking everything back up. I mean, the whole gamut of apartment buildings. And
wow.
The advantage of this is that I saw what real estate could do. I mean, my dad would always tell me, the reason I'm not paying you to do this work is because it's what's going to send you to college.
Yeah.
And you'll always inherit it one day. So make sure you're doing the work at a high level. So that was an eye-opener for me, going through that process as a young man, seeing getting your hands on into real estate. And so it kind of formulated what I wanted to do when I went to law school. My dad encouraged me to become an attorney, I think because he wanted someone on free retainer for life.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He wanted somebody on his team. He's like, you know what? I pay lawyers a lot of money. If only I had a son who was a lawyer.
Yeah, because my grandfather, his dad was an attorney, and he never gave him free legal advice. So I fell into that category because my dad's one of those that many times he does things that he shouldn't, and he will. I say, Dad, you shouldn't be doing that, and he said, well, that's what I have you for.
Yeah.
But I'm not that type of attorney.
Yeah.
Because I realized early on that the asset protection side is really important, the tax planning side, that a lot of investors don't tend to work with professionals who understand it, the nuances of using land trust, LLCs, how to set them up with anonymity, how to reap the tax benefits that come from real estate investing. Instead, they get bounced back and forth between an attorney who, if you say, hey, I want to get involved in house hacking, they think that you're trying to break into someone's house electronically, and they don't understand what that concept is. So I created the firm with my partner, Toby Mathis, in 99. And just as, we're doing small events and we started bringing on clientele, and we took this firm with that focus and really expanded it because people said, hey, we like the asset protection. What can you do for us on tax? And so we decided, all right, let's go out and build a tax department. And so over 20 some years, we built this firm up. Now we have about 500 employees, and we work primarily with real estate investors. We have offices in a few different states. And it's really become something that, if you ask me when I graduated law school and I was 27 years old, hey, do you think you'd be where you are today? I'd be like, nope, could never envision it. But what it's done for me, though, it's allowed me to build a sizable real estate portfolio. I mean, it's not huge. It depends. I guess it's all comparative. About 300 properties. A lot of them are single family, but we also have multifamily, commercial, mobile home parks, self-storage. And so we flip properties pretty actively in different markets. So even though I'm an attorney and I do this during the day, my passion is real estate and building the teams around that to help make that a success.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, let's jump into it because I really want to, have our listeners just, gain some insight from you and everything that you've been able to do through your business. But let's just get started with the importance of structuring your real estate investment as a business. Is there, and we're going to, I hopefully can dig into this a little bit, is what is the best strategy? Does it depend on what you are doing? If you are buy and holding real estate for the long term, is that a different business strategy than, say, if you set up a business as a flipper and you're doing short-term flips? Kind of what's the pluses and minuses of creating your business structure?
Well, I mean, you hit it right on the head. And what you're talking about is exit strategy, or what is your intent for buying the property? And that's what a lot of people miss. Everyone says, I'm a real estate investor. Well, that's just so generic. It doesn't tell me what exactly you're doing in real estate. And breaking down those different strategies then leads to different types of structures, because I often refer to people, it's like a three-legged stool. There's asset protection planning, there's tax planning, and there's business planning. And entities, if they're set up right, can actually help you do more overall with your investing. And if they're set up wrong, it can hinder your investing. And so when we're looking at an investor, one of the first questions I ask is, what type of investing are you getting involved with? All right. So that's the first thing. And then I want to know, what's your exit strategy here? Is this a legacy investment? You want to, build it up and pass it on and generate income for life? Or are you looking to dump this property in 3 to 5 years? And what type of property is that going to be? Because that is going to change the recommendation that I would make, because the entity and the structure you put together should help you reach that goal. It shouldn't hinder it. I think about, say, someone that's going to get involved in multifamily, and you're going to put this deal together, and you talk to your CPA, and your CPA will tell you possibly that, hey, you can set up an LLC and it doesn't have to file a tax return, especially here in Washington. Husband and wife, you can set up a disregarded LLC. And that sounds enticing because that's a cost savings. And I often say people who have a cost mindset will always gravitate towards something that's going to put a few dollars back in their pocket. My dad has that. I refer to it with him as a scarcity mindset. And the problem with adopting that is, if you don't know your exit strategy, if I plan to sell this in 3 to 5 years after it's stabilized and rehabbed, well, that LLC that you just created today is going to cause problems for you when you sell the property 3 to 5 years, because what do lenders ask for? The underwriter is going to ask to see a copy of the tax returns associated with the LLC. You don't have it because your LLC wasn't filing tax returns. And I know this is kind of high level here, and people are going, what the hell is he talking about? What I'm relating to you is that it's not a one size fits all. And that's what I tell real estate investors over and over again. Do not approach it just because your attorney or whoever you're working with tells you to set up a limited liability company. Ask them why. Okay, why are you making this recommendation? Hey, I invest this way. How is it going to impact me from a tax standpoint? How's it going to impact me when I exit? And if they say, well, what do you mean? Well, that's kind of your answer right there, is whether or not they work with investors day in and day out, and if they're an investor themselves. So you want to understand, though, I think, what are the different strategies, right? Depending on if you're flipping or holding. So generally speaking, the first thing I would tell people who are going to get involved in real estate investing or currently have assets, and they're going to hold them long term, all right? Single family, let's just talk about that.
And long term being more than 5 years?
More than 5 years, absolutely.
10 years, okay.
Yeah, longer term. Actually more than a year.
Yeah, okay.
Anything more than a year. In that case, the way I like to structure it is that I am a big fan of anonymity.
Okay.
Can't sue what you can't see.
Yeah.
Okay. Jesse Jones, right?
Yeah.
Local guy here, does the investigative reporter. He contacted me one time trying to figure out who a client was behind an entity, because he ran into this brick wall with this investigation. He said, you guys set up this entity. I can't figure out who owns it. I'm like, well, that's a you problem.
That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want you knowing them. And so when you think about your investments and your tenants, I know this growing up because my mom's greatest fear whenever my dad would go out of town on business was our tenants, because my dad was a hands-on landlord. He was his own PM. And so they knew when he wasn't around, because he always stopped by the apartment buildings on the way home from work.
Sure.
And they would call up middle of the night, phone calls my mom would receive, hang-ups, or, hey, I know you're alone, that type of stuff. She would warn my brother and I, hey, I got the 38 on the nightstand. If you come down the hall at night, you better announce yourself and turn on the lights, because she was that afraid. Why does that happen? Because everything is traceable back to you. They know where you live. They know they can skip trace and find out your phone number. And so I think that when you're setting up your plan, I don't want my tenants knowing where I live, that I am the owner of the property. Even if I self-manage, if I was doing that, I would never hold myself out as the owner. I would just say, hey, I just manage these properties. I don't know who the hell the owner is. And you don't have anything on the public record that would show a curious third party that you're the owner. So what do? You set up your structures. Typically, I like to use a Wyoming limited liability company because it doesn't report back. They don't collect any information on who the members or managers are. And then I have it own all of my Washington LLCs.
Okay.
So as we were talking before we got started here, on my investments here in Washington, you would never know that I'm the owner of these properties because there's nothing on the Washington Secretary of State's website that points to me. There's nothing in the property records, tax records that points to me. All of it is hidden. And it points to this virtual business address that we use for our clients in Wyoming through our Wyoming entity. And so that, I think, is the first level of defense because you don't want to appear to be an attractive target.
Sure.
That's who attorneys want to go after. And you want them, if they did sue you, to take your policy limits. That's why we have the insurance and not go after more. So when we're setting up our structures, I like to set them up with, hey, you start with a base level entity. That's the one you own. And then that entity will own every other investment or single family LLC that you create. They all point down to that one company. And you can set those up in a way in which I could have 10 Washington LLCs and not have to file a single federal tax return.
Yeah.
But then that holding company, well, in that case, I oftentimes like to have it file a partnership return. And when I say holding company, and you're wondering, well, was that a special type of LLC? It's not. It's just a term of art. All it is a limited liability company that you own, you control, and it owns all of your other LLCs. And here's the advantage, because if say you had that structure, say if you had a holding company and 6 limited liability companies all owned by that one, if an attorney were to ask you, how many LLCs do you own? What is your answer?
1.
Exactly. I only own 1.
Yeah.
And my neighbor, he owns 7. He's the guy you should be going after. Why are you going after me? I only own 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I would typically structure. And there's different ways in which, you need to look at, if you're financing your properties, you have mortgages on them, how to get those properties into the LLCs, whether or not they're Freddie Fannie type mortgages, those can be transferred in without any concern for a due on sale clause, assuming Freddie Fannie have purchased them.
Yeah.
So whenever you're setting up an LLC and you're going to move your property into it, what I tell people is go to Freddie or Fannie's website, their loan lookup tool. You can just type that in, Freddie Fannie loan lookup. You go there and you type in your address, your name, and your social security number, and it'll tell you whether or not Freddie or Fannie owns it. And the reason why this is important is back in 2018, they changed their underwriting guidelines. Because one of the greatest concerns investors used to have is like, hey, if I put my property into a limited liability company, the lender will accelerate my mortgage.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And many of us have 3% mortgages, 4% mortgages, and now those rates are at 8. Do you want to get that accelerated? I think not.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure it's owned by Freddie or Fannie, because if they haven't bought it yet, and it's still held with evergreen funding, whoever you used, just because they underwrote it with their guidelines doesn't mean that they need to abide by those guidelines. So that can be a problem. And so then in that case, if it's not, then we use what's referred to as a land trust as our title holding vehicle. And unlike an LLC, which has to be registered with the Secretary of State and set up with the state and is a public document, a land trust, it's private. No one knows what's inside of it. You set it up. And what's unique about it, it's similar to a living trust, but the difference was when you transfer property into this form of a trust agreement, your ownership can be placed wherever you want. I mean, you can transfer it. So if I wanted to give you my property and I didn't want this to show on the public record that I transferred my real estate to Jeff, what I could do is I could put my property into a land trust. Now, the land trust is on title as the owner, and then I transfer you the land trust. And so your name would never appear on the public in the chain of title because the land trust went to you and it owns the property. So with knowing how that works, this can provide anonymity for ownership from the lender, which I originally talked about. Lenders don't accelerate when properties are transferred into these types of trusts. So I put it in the trust and I park it there. And then I take that trust and I'm going to move it to a limited liability company, make the LLC the owner of the trust. And the reason you have to take that additional step is because of the fact that the trust by itself, if a tenant were to bring a cause of action, let's say, I've had this happen. In the last 3 years, I've had 2 properties burned to the ground because of faulty wiring. No one was hurt. But if they were, then they would sue the owner, and the owner happens to be the trust. And if I was listed as the owner of the trust in the trust document, that means they could come after me, and I don't want that to happen. So I make my LLC the owner of my trust. So that's, I think, is a great strategy to be familiar with those types of tools, land trust, LLCs, because depending on how you're investing, where you're investing, in the mortgage on the property, I mean, the idea is, hey, I want to make sure I'm going to get this property into this protected environment, and I'm going to do it in a way in which it doesn't mess up my loan, accelerate it, allows me to sell it, provides anonymity, doesn't increase my taxes. And so that's what we look at for long-term investors.
And what's the cost of doing something like this other than a setup cost? Like, I'm just thinking an LLC here in Washington State, it's like once a year, I don't know, $60 or whatever it is. Is that it? And so you have all these LLCs that basically the cost is a one time a year fee, and then you just have this structure in place that continues to roll out. Yeah.
100%. Land trust, there is not an annual fee to maintain it because it's not filed anywhere.
Sure.
It's a private document.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but other than that, I often tell people, think of it as a low cost form of insurance. You can't dump your insurance when you put your properties into entities.
Yeah.
But it provides this additional layer. And hopefully, nothing's ever going to happen. You're never going to be sued. I've only been sued a few times in my entire career. But I can tell you from those clients that we have, since we work nationwide and, predominantly just with real estate investors, when you see those cases that do occur, sometimes they could be $100,000 they're asking for, or I have one situation where a client, they was being sued for $15 million. And it's in those instances where you see how by creating the structures in the manner in which I'm describing, really aid in the settlement negotiation to get that case dropped and get them to leave and just take the policy limits. Because that's what we want. We want to maintain our asset, and we don't want them coming after us.
Yeah. I've heard all kinds of different recommendations around, setting up LLCs and having 2 or 3 properties in an LLC versus having every property in its own LLC. What's kind of your strategy, or what's your recommendation from how many properties? Is it a percentage? Like where do you fall on the how many things go into an LLC that go into the other LLC and stack these suckers up?
I'm an attorney that sets up LLC, so I'm going to tell you need 2 LLCs per property. It's a great question. And so when I started teaching and working in this area of the law, I used to tell people, hey, group properties, 2 to 3 properties per limited liability company, no more than $500,000 in equity.
Okay.
And the reason I did that is because I recognized to set up an LLC, it was a cost involved there. And so I had that cost mindset that I was referring to. But then as my own investing started to grow, I realized that as investors, why do we invest if you're investing in single family rentals and you're not flipping? You're investing for income. And so I was focused on equity, when in reality, my focus should have been on the income, because I want to preserve as much income as I am generating from my properties, because that income allows me to live a much different lifestyle. It allows me to send my kids to school. It's what I'm going to retire upon. And so what can happen is that if you adopt the equity approach in the properties, in one of those properties, let's say it's a devastating lawsuit that hits because somebody's severely injured as a fire, and then they sue the LLC, then every property in there is at risk. And let's assume that you had 4 properties and they take all 4 properties, and that income that you were generating from those properties amounted to $50,000 a year. That's now gone. You no longer have that $50K, and that $50K was that same income that you allowed your spouse. She's no longer working now. She's focused on real estate full time. Well, now she's going back to work.
Yeah.
So because of that, I tell people, hey, on your first 10 to 12 properties, I would look at 1 LLC per property, because that's when you're first getting started. That's when you know the least amount about what you're doing. You're going to have the most vulnerability there, and you're going to come to rely upon that income, because it's going to change your lifestyle. And then once you start building up from there, then start grouping because you can afford to take on more risk. So I threw out, I have 300 properties. I don't have 300 LLCs. I probably have about 30 limited liability companies overall. And I group. I have no problem putting 10 properties in one LLC.
That's good.
Hey, why? Because that LLC has 10 properties in it. It makes, let's say, $40,000 a year in rental income. I can drop $40K. It's not going to impact it because my portfolio overall generates $1.5 million a year. And you think 40,000 is going to change whatever scotch or wine I like to drink? Not at all.
Yeah.
But if 40,000 is all you have coming in and you lose that,
that's an issue.
It is. So that's my approach. And, some of people see the wisdom in that and they take that approach. And other people, they're like, well, no, I just want to group them. And so ultimately it's up to the client what their risk tolerance is.
Yeah. Now, on the other side of this, we've been talking about long-term rentals.
Yep.
You said you also flip. We flipped in the past as well. What is the difference in a structure you would set up in, say, homes that you're holding on to less than a year, right? You're trying to get in and out of them in a couple of months because that sets up a different tax structure as well, because now you've got short-term capital gains on top of that. So what's kind of your recommendation for those that maybe are in the flipping mindset or wholesaling even, I guess, too?
Yeah. So first off, understand and appreciate that type of income is considered active income. It's not passive. So the income you generate is going to be subject to self-employment taxes. If you're doing it in your own name or through an LLC that's disregarded for federal tax purposes, meaning it doesn't have to file a return, it's going to hit Schedule C of your 1040. And we don't want that. We want to keep that activity off our Schedule C. We don't want to be classified as a dealer because it can impute that to our other investments potentially, which means that there's negative ramifications that are associated. You can't 1031 exchange, you can't depreciate, all kinds of things that just are not beneficial. So we like to isolate that activity. Meaning if I'm involved in wholesaling or I'm flipping, I will typically recommend you create a corporation, either a C or an S corporation. It could be an LLC taxed as a C or an S. And again, like the base structure that we use for real estate investors that own single families or investment real estate, that's going to be your holding company. That's going to be the company that you operate and you own. And if all you're doing is wholesaling, great. Just run all the income through that one entity. But when you move from wholesaling to flipping, right? Because you're going to keep some of these, you want to do them on your own.
Yeah.
Well, then you do not want to run that activity through your company. There you want to create one LLC per property. Hands down, every time you do a flip, separate LLC. So your LLC, I'll give you a perfect example of this. Working with a client several years ago here in Tacoma, flipping properties. And I created a structure for him where it was a corporation that owned 3 separate LLCs. We started with 3 LLCs and all the LLCs pointed to the company. So any money the LLC made got reported to the company. But I said, buy each of your flips in this separate LLC. And once you flip the property, shut it down and set up another. Well, he went out and he bought 3 properties in one limited liability company, even though he had the other 2 set up.
Yeah.
And he flipped one. And it was over here I think it was in the UP area. Flipped the property. The buyer was talking to the neighbor, and the neighbor said, hey, you've got a basement down there, and we have a problem in the wintertime with flooding, and I don't know what type of water remediation that he put in. You got to have that checked out to make sure you won't flood. So she brought out a plumber, and the plumber said, it's all wrong, wasn't built to code, but it passed inspection.
Yeah.
So it's going to be $50,000 to fix this. And so she's like, oh, no, I got ripped off, and she hired a local attorney here, and they sent my client a letter. They said, hey, we want $50,000 or we're going to bring an action against you. And looking at this, and he's really distraught over, he goes, what do I do? And I said, well, we need to try to settle. Maybe we can get to take 30. And then he got a little upset. He said, well, you created this structure and I thought I was going to be protected. And, I went back and I showed him, I said, now let me explain to you why I said one property per LLC. Because in this scenario right here, you have 2 projects you have not yet completed in this LLC that they're threatening lawsuit against. And the attorney specified that he's going to file a lis pendens, which means this. He can lien your properties for $50,000. And when you sell or refi those properties, that money up to 50K is going to be paid into the court registry until you either settle or you go to trial. And if you lose going to trial because your real estate purchase and sale agreement states that the loser pays the attorney's fees, you're going to be out even more money.
Yeah.
So can you stomach this fight? Are you willing to have 50 grand tied up? And, it was a dose of reality. So had to settle. Had that been a situation where this attorney sent the letter and that LLC had no assets in it?
It would have probably been closed at that point because he'd sold it, right? Close the LLC as soon as you sell the property.
That's right. Done. Who are you going to sue? A dead person? I mean, that's where you're at. Or you sue the entity that has no assets. I would throw that letter away and not even respond.
Yeah.
And so this is why if you're flipping, you're in a situation, especially in this market. And there's been there's been an increase in the number of clients that we work with that flip real estate who have contacted us in the past year, where buyers are now threatening to bring claims against them under the disclosures. And it's really not the disclosures. It's that they realized, hey, maybe I overpaid for that property and they're feeling a little tight. They want to get some money back. And, if you don't have any assets in that company, you got nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, especially like you said, with the market being where it is, I could see buyers just all of a sudden being, oh my gosh, I paid too much for this, freaking out, and then coming after you as well. Well, I'm glad to know that we've got ours set up pretty close to what you're recommending already. We have when we're flipping and stuff like that, we have a S Corp that we do all the flipping and stuff through, all of our short-term stuff. And then we've got our LLCs that we do our long-term holds through. So that's pretty well. We don't have LLCs stacked on LLCs yet. So we're not, but again, and to your point, right, there's a scalability here. And I think that is where working with somebody like you who has gone through this at all different levels, you start to understand when is it okay to have one or two LLCs versus you're at 300 units. You need to start thinking about how you're protecting yourself in different ways across different areas. You're multiple states now. And so that is an issue of how do you protect yourself across multiple states and all of that as well. So I think that's the thing that I'm taking away is like, just understand that when you scale, there's a scalability to the business side as well. You can't just say, oh, I started my LLC because I had 3 homes and now you have 50 homes and you still have a LLC. That structure isn't going to support you like it did when you got started. And so just understanding your business and the way you grow your business has to grow with the amount of properties that you have within that business as well.
And if you act as your own PM, that's creates even more risk for yourself.
Right.
So where I see investors sometimes don't appreciate this is that the cash that they have on the sideline that they're intending to put into their next deal, they keep that in their personal bank account or they keep it in the entity that owns the property. And you shouldn't do that. You should actually be pulling that cash. I have what I call my funding LLC, where I put all my cash in a limited liability company. And then when I need it, I take it out. And if you're going to borrow, you want to season it, for 60 days. But I just take it out when I need it, and then I just keep everything over there in a protected environment. So it gives you security that, hey, if you are serving as your own PM and somebody sues you because you advertise your properties being family friendly, and they say, oh, you're discriminating against me because I don't have a family. Yeah, you're like, what are you talking about? Well, that's a case they could come after you for it. So you want to make sure you're doing everything you can to put up those walls. Yeah. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about land trust. You brought it up a little bit, and I'd like to dig into this because this is something that I personally have started thinking about what does that maybe look like for some of our properties. And from I'm trying to wrap my head around it because I don't know a whole lot about land trust. But one of the ideas that you brought up earlier is that it's a private entity. It's not actually registered with the state or federal government. And that gives you different security. That allows you to do different things with it, correct? Correct. So what it mainly does is it gives you privacy. Okay. Of ownership. So if I came up with a trust, say we called it the Fuzzy Bear Trust. Okay. You have to appoint a trustee. Okay. And so when you transfer title into a trust, title will always be taken in the care of the trustee's name. Okay. In my case, it would be Clint Coons, trustee of the Fuzzy Bear Trust. Okay. That's how you would take title. Now, the beneficiaries who own the trust, their information is not disclosed. Okay. because a trust is a private document. So the only person who is aware of who's actually involved with this trust, beneficiaries and the trustee.
Okay.
So if you wanted to move property into a land trust, the last thing you would do is set up a trust and put your own name down as a trustee.
Yeah.
You'd want to use either a trust company, a professional, or maybe you set up your own LLC that has anonymity, maybe a Wyoming LLC, to be the trustee of your trust, because you don't want title to go from Jeff to Jeff as trustee of the Fuzzy Bear Trust.
Right.
What the hell? You've done nothing there.
Yeah.
And so why do people do this? Because if there's a judgment entered against you personally or an LLC that holds an asset, then that judgment will stick to every property that's in that person's name or that entity's name. But if the property's in a trust name, then it's not going to stick. So you can freely sell or refi the property with the bank that will allow you to do that in the trust name, and those funds will never be taken by a creditor. So I like to use it in that manner. And for 28, 29 years, I served as the trustee on land trusts that we created for our clients. And I know it always freaks people out. They're like, oh, that's how Clint built his real estate portfolio, off of all these suckers.
Yeah.
But what I would do is you'd put my name down as a trustee, and the client say you would transfer your property to Clint Coons, trustee of this trust.
Yeah.
I resign my position immediately, right after you sign the deed, because that's all you need to transfer title. You don't need to record it yet. I resign, and then you're appointed as the successor trustee. So on title, I mean, if you went and you looked up my name right now, you could do this. Search the county recorders in Pierce or King and put in Clint Coons. You're going to find a ton of real estate. I can guarantee you, it's not mine.
Yeah.
But you don't know whose it is.
Yeah, right.
Because of the way I've set these things up. And so that's the whole process here. It gives you this anonymity. And then the ownership, wherever that ownership is transferred to. I mean, now, the mistake that people make, and I've heard gurus come into Washington State and tell people, hey, you want to sell property and not have to worry about the excise tax? All you need to do is put it in a land trust and sell someone the land trust, and it's a tax-free transfer. No, in Washington, greater than 50% triggers that. And so this isn't a way for you to avoid any taxes. All it's designed to do is keep your property transfers private, right? That's all it's going to do. And so, like we talked about also the due on sale clause. That's a reason why people do it. So a lot of times where I use this technique is, let's say that you came to me and you had 4 properties in one LLC. You say, Clint, I really see wisdom in breaking these out. So in that case, we have 2 options. We could deed the property from your LLC to you individually, turn around and then redeed it into another limited liability company. You're going to see this chain of title transfers. Or what we could do is transfer title from the LLC to a land trust and then transfer the land trust through an assignment, just one page. I hereby assign my interest to you and then you to the new LLC, and no one sees any of that. All they would see on title is that this property originally held in the first LLC, Crazy Squirrel LLC, moved into this Fuzzy Bear Trust. And they don't know who owns the trust from that point on. And I've had attorneys reach out to me before trying to foreclose on property. This was in Riverside, California, on one of my client's properties. And he served me as a trustee. And I called him up. I said, you didn't effectuate service process. I am not that trustee. Well, who is? You think I'm going to tell you that's attorney-client privilege? And he started going off on how I'm screwing this up. It's going to cost him more and I could be liable. I'm like, all right, whatever. You think you're going to freak me out? I'm an attorney. I know what you're doing here. But so it does add value to an overall structure.
And is there also a benefit if you're talking about generational wealth and wanting to pass on to your children or to other people in death or later on in life? Is it easier to move a trust if properties are in a trust? Is it easier to give guardianship to, say, your children or to others? Is there any benefit in having trust that way?
Well, for that, I like to use a living trust.
Okay.
Because one of the concerns that I always have, I tell people, is that you raise your kids to be a certain way, and you hope that they embody those same values that you've instilled in them.
Yeah.
But there are always influencers out there that can change that. Friends, spouses, right? That could possibly move them in a different direction. And you've probably seen this before. I've seen it in my own family. My wife's uncle and aunt, they inherit this money. They take the money, they turn around, they inherit properties. They turn around, they sell the properties, take that money, went from real estate into a Mercedes.
Yeah.
Who does that, right?
Yeah.
Someone who doesn't understand money and wealth and what it takes. And so with a living trust, you can create a legacy that will produce income. All your properties can be held in there. They're in a protected state, so spouses can't force a sale of that. Your kids can receive the income stream for their lifetime, and then it can continue on to multiple generations. And more importantly, one of the things that my wife and I built into our trust, because we have so much real estate, and we want to make sure that our kids are taken care of, but I don't want it to be a scenario where they're like, well, if we're making $600,000 a year off real estate, I don't have to work.
Yeah.
That'll never happen, because the distributions from our living trust, it's tied to how much money they make or what they're doing in life. You can say, well, if you're involved in charity work, or you're a teacher, or you're a policeman, or a military, something like that, then you're going to get this set sum. Or stay-at-home mom, or whatever that is, you can compensate for that. But if you want to sit there and work at Starbucks, that's your greatest ambition in life, great, good for you. Well, you're not going to receive more than what you generate, because I raised you to have greater ambitions and work harder in life than that, because to me, that's important in our family. You have to be driven. And if you're not going to be driven because you think you're going to get free money, that money's not going to come to you.
That's good. That's good to set up. Well, I'll tell you what, Clint, you are a wealth of knowledge, and it's so great to have you right here in our home state of Washington. It's been great being able to talk with you, and I've already got my mind running of like, okay, what's our next move? when do I need to reach out to Clint and be like, okay, buddy, I need to figure out what we're going to do, what our next move is. If others are listening to this and they'd like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you, to maybe have a call or sit down with your team and maybe start some conversations?
Well, they can go to andersonadvisors.com, and you can set up a strategy session there. You can also find me on YouTube as well. Just type in my name, YouTube. I'm all over the place.
All right.
As far as that. The thing is about education, right? We want to make sure that, whatever you're doing, you want to get educated about these types of structures to become better informed. I mean, you're not using us to create your structures and you want to use a local guy, that's great. But you need to know the questions to ask.
Yeah.
And when you go in there, go in prepared to ask those questions. If the professional doesn't know how to answer them because they don't understand what you're doing, then that's not the person you need to be working with, because they're not going to be advising you the way which is most beneficial to you in growing your structure or your investing.
Yeah, I love that. And I will make sure that we've got links to your website and to your YouTube channel as well, because I know you have some great stuff over there on YouTube for people to share as well. So, Clint, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us on the Washington State Real Estate Investing Podcast. Really appreciate your insight, and thanks for taking time with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.